Welcome to Saturday's Warrior. Man, just as it seemed like realignment news was slowing down, and that with actual football being played this weekend on week 0, we are going to be able to focus on actual football. Rumors are gaining traction that perhaps the ACC is going to meet to approve the additions of Stanford, Cal, and SMU after all. And so today we want to look at what options does the American have if they lose SMU to replace them? And we want to look at that, but by the time this video comes out, there may already be an announcement of whether SMU is actually leaving or perhaps they're going to be staying in the American. But I think this is an interesting topic nonetheless, because whether it's SMU or it ends up being Memphis or USF or Tulane or whoever, it seems like at some point the American has a lot of top candidates for the next wave of realignment. So right now we're assuming it would be SMU, but if it's not, I think the conversation remains: what schools, what options does the AAC have for further expansion? And so we want to look at those schools, and we'll come up with a few who we think would be top targets for the conference. But before we get into it, we're suckers for realignment. We know you are too. So please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel as we continue to cover realignment and college football. And now let's get to it. All right, so here's our map of the American. And in this scenario, we know that SMU is leaving, so they're gone. Now let's take a look at their media deal. So they're pulling in about $7 million a year. We know that their buyout is $10 million, but they're supposed to give 27 months notice. So if they want to get into the ACC anytime soon, they're going to have to negotiate a higher buyout. And we know that the 3 other schools that left for the Big 12 negotiated, I believe it was around 18 million, but they also stayed in the conference for a couple years. So SMU would likely be paying even more than that to get out, and that's on top of them foregoing any media revenue from the ACC just to get an invite. So it'll be rather pricey for SMU, but it does put the AAC in a good position in terms of getting that revenue from SMU and being able to add other schools. So let's take a look at who the candidates would be to help fill in that gap that SMU is leaving in the conference. So first we're going to look at the next strongest of the group of 5 conferences, the Mountain West. And at this point, obviously there's lots of good candidates, a lot of schools that have had a lot of history and a lot of success over the years at the group of 5 level. Also, it would help the conference expand westward and get into new time zones and new markets. So you could see a lot of appeal there. But now let's look at the Mountain West deal, and they're making $4 million. And we know that if they wanted to get into the AAC by next year, it would cost them 32. And if they want to wait and go at 2025, then it would only be 17. But that's still quite a bit for only 3 million more per year. And we see that the Mountain West, their deal ends in 2026. So and in this scenario, if Cal, Stanford, and SMU are all going to the ACC, it's likely that Oregon State and Washington State would be joining the Mountain West. So there's a chance that they're even able to renegotiate the deal and get a slightly higher payout. And even if it stays even at $4 million for now, when their deal expires in 2026, they, between inflation and now having 2 former Power 5 schools in their conference, they're probably going to be able to pull a better deal, closing that gap with the 7 million, if not, surpassing it. So at this point, I really can't see any Mountain West schools leaving for the American. So that brings us to the next conference we'll look at, the MAC. Now, the MAC does make a lot less money than the other 2, but their buyout is also still $6 million. So they'd be paying $6 million to get out to go earn $7 million. Would you say, yeah, over the life of that contract, that's a lot more than pulling in $600,000 each year? I totally agree. But their media deal also comes up in 2026. So I think it's fair to assume that at that point, they'll be able to negotiate a higher payout from their media deal. Now, how much more? I don't know. But at the end of the American, with it losing so many of its top brands and really banking on a strategy of getting the biggest markets and counting on that growth to help them, the MAC would be leaving the familiarity of their conference that has been very tight knit, and they get good exposure. We know about Maction on ESPN in the middle of the week. Nobody else is playing, but you got good, exciting, well, maybe not good, but exciting MAC games to watch midweek to kind of satisfy that college football craving. And yes, American is on ESPN, but there's no guarantee that they're going to get that same kind of exposure. So, do they want to take that chance, that long term bet, or do they want to stay where it's comfortable and certain? So, let's take a look at the map. As we can see with the MAC, they are one of the few conferences that is still very regionalized. They're pretty close together. They've been together for a long time. They get that midweek exposure. So, do they want to leave that familiarity to then have to take a lot of that extra money they'd be bringing in from media rights to for all that additional travel? I don't know. It is a lot more money, but those are things that probably matter a lot to those schools. I think their best shot would be going after Buffalo, who's a little bit newer to the conference and not quite as centralized with the other schools. Geographically, it's a little bit on an island. And you look at the other programs who have been in that situation, haven't really lasted. You have Temple, who we see here. There was UCF, who was an odd one from the beginning. UMass, Marshall. So there's been a lot of schools that haven't been exactly in that geographic footprint that haven't lasted. So I would say that's probably your best bet going after Buffalo. But you also have some of the other schools, other brands that have had some success out of the group of five level over the years. So you got NIU, Western Michigan, Toledo. So theoretically, you could go after those schools, but I think Buffalo is the one that makes the most sense. And looking at some of these stats here from Wikipedia of the conference, we see that, Buffalo not only being on that geographic island there, removed from the rest of the conference, their enrollment is the largest and they've got a huge endowment. They're also an AAU school, so that would fit in with a lot of the other programs, Tulane, South Florida, Rice, and that could be a draw. Plus, it is in New York. They don't really own the Buffalo market. They'll definitely be overshadowed there by the Bills, but even the Sabres. But it is in New York, so that would be, if I were to go for anyone in the MAC, that's really where I would focus. So that brings us to the next conference we'll look at, Conference USA. And it's hard for me to believe that they make more money than the MAC. So it does make me question my numbers a little bit. If you have other numbers, again, please let me know in the comments and provide a source if you can. But according to this, I mean, there's not a whole 150,000 per school each year. Is not a huge number, but when that's all you're pulling in from media, every bit matters. But again, after years of Conference USA being rated after, the American has been rated, and then they go to Conference USA and pull away schools, they've really fallen to the bottom of the FBS level. And so I think any of them would be happy to jump ship and go to the American. For even as certain as the situation might be in American, it certainly looks better than Conference USA. And also, they're on CBS. And so if you ever try to watch games on CBS Sports, it's very difficult. And I think many people don't, even that have cable, don't have that channel. So it does make it tough to watch those games. They do have some content that'll also be on ESPN Plus. So just not great exposure, not a great brand at this point. I think you have a much easier time going after these schools. But there's not, as we just mentioned, they've kind of are scraping the bottom of the barrel. They've gone and had to elevate up several schools from the FBS. And then we've got New Mexico State and UTEP, which are pretty geographically removed from the rest of the schools. They're way out there and have not done well over the years. So don't see them going after any of those schools. So let's go to the Wikipedia stats again. And what stands out here to me is Liberty. You look at their enrollment is huge, their endowment is huge. And if you're not familiar with them, they really aspire to be like Notre Dame is to the Catholics or BYU is to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And that is their aspiration. And they have a lot of money behind that, and they're willing to and are investing in their campus, their facilities, in recruiting, and that is all really within their potential to help them grow. And I'm not really sure why they decided to not be independent anymore, but to be in Conference USA. That feels like a step down to me because I think they do have a lot of potential, and I think that their base would travel well within the region of the where the American schools are. So that is a strong contender. And then also you have Florida International in Miami. That is another one, and they also have a pretty large enrollment. And after that, not a whole lot that stands out from these other schools. So out of these remaining 5 schools, here's how I would kind of power rank them in terms of who the American might want to go after. I would say Liberty, then FIU, and then Middle Tennessee because they are relatively close to Nashville, and that has been American strategy to go for big markets with potential for growth. I don't know how entrenched they are in the Nashville market. That's something they'd have to look at. If you know, please let me know in the comments. So even though arguably La Tech and Western Kentucky have 2 of the bigger brands out of this group, I would say they probably don't really fit the Americans' growth strategy. So last but not least, this brings us to the Sun Belt, which is a conference that has really come out of the ashes. I remember when the Sun Belt was at the bottom of the group of 5 conferences. And I mean, I couldn't have even told you anybody that was in the Sun Belt. I didn't care at all. And they've really been able to rebrand. They're known as the Fun Belt. And here, this media deal has them still making less than the other 2 conferences. Again, I don't know if that's the case. Their buyout looks reasonable. And why I want to look at them last is because I think they have a lot of good options for the American and a lot of likely candidates that they go after. So let's take a look. So regionally, the Sun Belt and the American are basically covering the same states. So they want to go after the biggest brands in the biggest markets that are going to have the most potential for growth. And I just don't see that through several of these schools: Southern Miss, South Alabama, Troy, Georgia Southern, etc. So I just don't see them really fitting that. It would be great if they could plug some holes where they're not already existing. So let's again go to the Wikipedia stats, my favorite, and Georgia State University surprised me a little bit on the size of the enrollment, but again, it's in that Atlanta market. It just surprised me because you have Georgia Tech already in Atlanta, and even though they're there, it still feels like Atlanta belongs to Georgia. So, in terms of getting that brand and recognition out there, it does seem like an uphill battle, but it's such a big market with a large enrollment and alumni base, from that large enrollment. You think that there is that chance to grow, that Atlanta has room for a third school over time if they continue to grow and if they're ever able to put that together and have some success on the field. On the other side of things, 2 of the schools with the bigger brands from the conference, Marshall and Coastal, have a very small enrollment base, and we know they're not really in booming markets. So even though it's a big brand, Marshall and Coastal are small. Appalachian State is a great brand, but really not too far from Charlotte. So if they're looking to plug some holes, they have some overlap with that market there. So, and then JMU, same as the schools from Conference USA. To be fair, I mean, they are closer to DC, but they're not that close. And so to be fair, since they are new to the FBS ranks, I would say those 4 really wouldn't be in consideration. Now, of these 5, the 2 schools with the most on-the-field success and arguably the largest brands are Louisiana and Arkansas State. but they just aren't in as big of markets as these other schools. And while it would be fun to see these rivalries, they're really close, like Memphis and Arkansas State, or the two Louisiana schools, that could turn into some really fun rivalries. I think, again, with their strategy being going after these large markets and really filling in some holes in their geography would probably be a higher priority. So I would say these two are out. So the three remaining schools we're considering are all in large markets. You have Texas State, which is between San Antonio and Austin. Now, obviously, they already have UTSA, and Austin is Longhorn Nation, but much of Texas is Longhorn Nation. And so the strategy here could be, look, we lost a Texas school. We want to get another Texas school. And then at the group of five level, if you're in Texas, you're in the American Conference. That could really be their strategy there. But again, I don't know how much Texas State really brings of that, but that could be the play. Georgia State obviously will be overshadowed by Georgia. And then in Atlanta, you already have Georgia Tech, which is a much bigger name, but also it feels like does not get as much play in that market as the Bulldogs. So they definitely be a distant third fiddle, but with that large alumni base, they could grow, and that could be a chance to take a piece of that. Atlanta is huge, so there's a big market there to at least get a sliver of. That could be the strategy. And then Old Dominion is in Norfolk, Virginia, which itself isn't the hugest market, but it's in the Hampton Roads area, which if you look at, and it's in Virginia, which is a relatively big state. But if you look at the 10 largest cities in Virginia, look at it's 6 of those are in the Hampton Roads area, not too far from ODU. So it's still a pretty big market, a lot of people there. And again, it's that chance for growth. So we've narrowed the list of top expansion candidates for the American down to a handful of schools. Now, if you think that I've overlooked a school, not given it the credit it's due, please let me know in the comments and explain the reasons why. I'm certainly open to it. I'm sure there's a great case to be made for several schools, but these are the schools that we've selected. And if I'm the American, I'm looking at it saying, okay, last time we lost 3 schools, we added back 6, really focus on strength in numbers since there's not really those quality of brands left anymore. And if SMU, you can argue the type of brand it has, it's certainly a name that people know. And Memphis, Tulane, Rice, ECU, USF, they're all names being thrown around in expansion talks. Navy. So if you're really worried about, getting the strength in numbers like they did last time, and really in markets that are growing, and you're hoping that that'll help compensate for losing some of those brands, maybe they look at it and say, you know what, other conferences are going to 16. Why don't we go to 16? We lost 1. We could add 3 and do that. And the schools I would go with would be Liberty, Georgia State, and FIU. Now, we've already made the case for these schools as we went through, but FIU, they're in Miami, and you could argue that Florida Atlantic already helps lock up some of that market, but I would say having another school in Miami, another one in Florida, is only a good thing. And then Georgia State, again, it puts you in Atlanta. That is a market you want to be a part of, even if right now it's only a small part. There is that chance for growth. And then Liberty, they have a huge student body. Their alumni base is going to continue to get bigger. They're wealthy, and they should travel really well throughout this region. But if politics do get in the way of adding Liberty, much as I suspect they did in the last round of realignment, then I would look towards ODU. You're still in Virginia, but you're in an even bigger market, and I think ODU could have that potential of being really the third major school in college athletics in the state of Virginia after Virginia Tech and UVA. So I think that would still give you a pretty solid mix to come in and fortify your conference. And of course, as I've already filmed the video, Brett McMurphy comes out with this tweet. It says, to lock in its media deal with ESPN and CBS Sports Network, Conference USA schools signed a 5-year grant of rights through 2027. Any school leaving before then must pay $800,000 for each year remaining in GOR. Conference USA's previous media deal with majority of games on Stadium and Facebook was only $400,000 annually per school. Okay, so taking those into account, I will come back to this list. I didn't want to refilm my video, but I will tack this on. So this is what we had. So I'll make those updates to reflect what Brett McMurphy shared. And so the media deal is 800,000, and then the buyout 3.2 for 4 years. So that is more expensive, and the current deal now only goes through 2027. So you think, okay, maybe this is something I'd rather wait out for some time and hit up the next round of realignment. However, again, with the buyout money from SMU, the American, if there was a school from Conference USA that they really wanted to go after, they could take that money to help with the buyout if it's necessary. Or if you're going for a school like Liberty, I don't think that becomes cost prohibitive to keep them from making that leap if that's what they want to do. So whether SMU is leaving the American or they're not, either way, we think that these schools would be some of the top targets for the conference if they need to expand in the next wave of realignment, whether that's soon or down the road. What do you think? Who could the American add to continue to fortify itself through as realignment continues? Please let us know in the comments, and do not forget, please, to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps a ton. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.